Brian was carving the turkey when my daughter-in-law said the words that would cost her everything. Not just the money, not just the house, something deeper. Honestly, Frank, Tiffany said, her wine glass poised midair, we're all just waiting for the will to kick in at this point. She laughed, like it was a joke, like I wasn't sitting right there at the table Helen and I bought. My son Brian didn't correct her. He just reached for the stuffing, eyes down, jaw tight. He'd heard her. He was letting it stand. That silence, cowardly and convenient, told me everything I needed to know. I looked at the turkey, golden brown, perfectly cooked, basted every 30 minutes for 4 hours. The same recipe my wife Helen had used for 37 Thanksgivings before she died. I looked at my family gathered around the table. Brian, Tiffany, their 2 kids, 8 and 10, already glued to their phones, oblivious to the adults' conversation. They hadn't touched their food. They hadn't said thank you. They'd asked to be excused after 5 minutes. This was what family looked like now, and I smiled. More wine, Tiffany? I asked. She blinked, surprised. Maybe she'd expected anger, hurt, something. Oh, sure, thanks, Frank. I poured. Steady hand, calm voice. The bottle wasn't cheap. I'd brought more than enough. Inside, I was already making a list. Almost everyone watching this isn't subscribed, but the ones who stay don't miss what comes next. It wasn't the first time Tiffany had said something like that. 6 months earlier, she'd asked me, point blank, over brunch at her favorite bistro, how much my house was worth. We were sitting on the patio, mimosas, avocado toast, the kind of place where everything costs 3 times what it should. Just curious, she'd said, stirring her mimosa. Brian and I have been looking at bigger places. The market's crazy right now. Your neighborhood must be worth a fortune, right? Something like that, I'd said. And you're all alone in that big house. She'd tilted her head, fake concern painted across her face like makeup. Don't you think it's too much space? 4 bedrooms for 1 person. You could downsize, put the equity into something that makes sense. Translation. Cash out and hand it over. I'd smiled then, too. Changed the subject. Asked about the kids. That's when I started paying attention. Patterns showed up fast. Every concern was just a down payment. A month later, Brian called. Dad, Tiffany and I have been talking. We think it might be time to add my name to your accounts. You know, just in case something happens. Power of attorney stuff. In case something happens, I repeated. Yeah, I mean, you're 71. It's just smart planning. What if you have a fall? What if you're in the hospital and can't make decisions? I was 71. I played tennis twice a week at the club and won. I'd had a comprehensive physical 2 months prior. Perfect blood. Pressure, cholesterol under control. Doctor said I had the cardiovascular health of a man in his 50s. But to them, I was ancient, fragile, incompetent, a liability, an asset to be managed. Let me think about it, I'd said. I didn't think about it. I called my lawyer the next morning. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just knew exactly who I was calling next. Patricia had been my attorney for 20 years. She'd handled Helen's estate when she passed 3 years ago. She knew everything about my family, every asset, every complication, every loose end. Frank, she said when I walked into her office in July. What's going on? You sounded urgent on the phone, I told her. The brunch conversation, the phone call about power of attorney, the way Tiffany looked at me sometimes, like I was already gone, and she was just waiting for the paperwork to clear. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and was quiet for a long moment. Do you want to update your will? She finally asked. I want to protect it. She understood immediately. A no contest clause. If anyone challenges the will, they forfeit their share. That's a start. What else? I thought about Thanksgiving. It was 4 months away. Helen had loved Thanksgiving more than any other holiday. She'd spent days preparing. Turkey, 3 kinds of stuffing, pies from scratch, homemade rolls. She'd made it magic. And now her memory was being used as a countdown timer to a payout. I didn't need a trigger, I said. I just needed the will to reflect reality, quietly, legally, and permanently. Patricia raised an eyebrow. You want full control. Yes? So you want to remove them completely? Yes. She tapped her pen on the desk, thinking, I can do that. You can change beneficiaries anytime. No warning required. If you revoke someone, they're out. Clean. Final. Do it. Frank, this is permanent. Once you do this, there's no going back. They'll never forgive you. I thought about Helen, about what she would say. She'd tell me to be careful, to think about Brian, to remember that family is forever. But Helen had never heard Tiffany calculate the square footage of our house like it was a stock portfolio. I know what I'm doing, I said. I'm not protecting memories, Patricia. I'm protecting a lifetime of work. Patricia nodded. Understood. We spent 2 hours drafting the new will. Patricia walked me through every clause, every contingency, every legal ramification. By the time I left, it was airtight. I signed it on July 15th, and then I waited for Thanksgiving. October rolled in, and Tiffany started planning. She called me 3 times in 2 weeks. Each call started the same way. Just coordinating Thanksgiving, she said. We'll host this year. You don't need to do all that cooking at your age. At my age, like 71 was 90. I've been hosting Thanksgiving for 40 years, I said the first time she called. I know, Frank, and you've done an amazing job, but it's a lot of work. The shopping, the cooking, the cleanup. Let us handle it this year. You just show up and relax. I heard what she wasn't saying. You're too old. Step aside. Let the next generation take over. Let us play house in your house while we wait to own it. I'll think about it, I said. Well, let me know soon. I need to order the turkey. The good ones sell out fast. She didn't wait for my answer. 2 days later, she texted the family group chat, the one she'd created and named Carter Family, even though I'd been a Carter for 71 years and she'd been one for 8. The text, Thanksgiving at our place this year, 2 p.m. Bring sides if you want, but we've got the main stuff covered. She'd decided for me, made the announcement, taken over. I replied, looking forward to it. Brian added a thumbs-up emoji. Then, 2 days later, another text. Just to Brian, but he sent it to me by mistake. Tiffany, we should talk about the house after the holidays. Brian. Oops. Wrong person. But I'd already seen it. I stared at that message for a long time. What I didn't say, I was looking forward to it for very different reasons. What I didn't know yet. Tiffany was already planning the menu, planning the seating, planning how to spend my money after I was gone. I arrived at 1:50 p.m., deliberately early. Tiffany opened the door like she was hosting a magazine shoot. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect performance. Frank, come in, come in. You're early. Early, like being punctual, was a character flaw. I handed her a bottle of wine. Expensive Cabernet. Oh, you didn't have to. She took it anyway, glanced at the label with practiced approval, smiled. This is great. Thank you. You always know what I like. Brian was in the living room, planted on the couch, watching football. Volume up. He stood up when I walked in, gave me a quick hug, the kind men give when they're not sure how. Hey, Dad. How's it going? Good. You? Busy. Work's been crazy. Year-end deadlines, you know. Brian had a solid job. Good money. But Tiffany wanted more. She always wanted more. The house wasn't big enough, the cars weren't new enough, the vacations weren't exotic enough. She always wanted more. The kids were upstairs in the game room. I heard video game sounds drifting down, explosions, gunfire, chaos. Dinner was ready at 2:30. The table looked beautiful. Not warm, beautiful, like it was meant to be photographed, not shared. We sat down. Brian said a short grace. 30 seconds, the same prayer his mother had taught him 20 years ago. Tiffany started passing dishes clockwise, the way she'd learned from some etiquette blog. That's when I noticed the chair, Helen's chair, the one at the head of the table. It was empty. Tiffany saw me looking. Oh, I didn't want to presume. That was always Helen's spot, wasn't it? I figured you'd want it, Frank. Honor her memory. Honor her memory. I sat down. The chair felt wrong. Too formal, too staged, too final. This looks wonderful, I said. Thanks. She beamed, genuinely pleased. I've been planning this for weeks. Brian started carving the turkey. He was careful, methodical, the way I'd taught him when he was 12. And that's when it happened. We were halfway through the meal. The kids had asked to be excused, again, and Tiffany had said yes with a wave of her hand. It was just the 3 of us now, adults only. That's when people said what they really meant. Tiffany refilled her wine glass. Third pour. She was getting loose. Her laugh was getting louder. Her filter was slipping. This is nice, she said, gesturing at the table with her glass. Just us, family, quality time. It is, I agreed. She leaned back in Helen's chair, the one she'd so graciously offered me, and swirled her wine. You know, Frank, I was thinking, you've been in that house for what, 40 years? 42. Right, 42 years. That's a long time. A lot of memories in those walls. I waited. I'd learned over the years that silence made people fill the space, and when they filled it, They showed you who they really were. It must be hard, she continued, her voice dripping with synthetic concern, being there alone. Every room has Helen in it, doesn't it? Her books in the den, her garden out back, her recipes in the kitchen. I didn't answer. I just took a slow sip of wine and watched her. Have you thought about moving? Downsizing? I mean, 4 bedrooms for one person. You could get a nice condo, something manageable, modern, low maintenance. I like my house. I know you do, but at some point, she trailed off, glanced at Brian like she was tagging him in. He cleared his throat, obedient. Dad, we're just worried about you. The stairs, the yard work. What if something happens and you're alone? Worried. Right. Tiffany leaned forward, elbows on the table, wine glass cradled in both hands. The thing is, Frank, we want to make sure you're taken care of, but we also want to be realistic, pragmatic. You're not going to live in that house forever, right? There it was, the opening, the phrasing she'd been working toward all meal. I picked up my wine glass, studied it. No one lives forever, I said quietly. She smiled, thought she'd won. Exactly. So it makes sense to plan ahead. Brian and I have been talking, and we think... Then she said it. Honestly, Frank, she interrupted herself, the wine loosening her tongue past the point of caution. We're all just waiting for the will to kick in at this point. She laughed, like it was nothing, like I wasn't sitting right there. Brian didn't laugh. He just stared at his plate, jaw tight, fork frozen halfway to his mouth. The room went still. I set down my glass, looked at her, really looked at her, then at Brian, at my son who couldn't meet my eyes. Need anything else, Tiffany? I asked. She swallowed. No, I'm fine. I refilled her glass anyway, because I was done reacting. Nothing, compared to what it was about to cost her. Brian finally spoke. Tiffany didn't mean it like that, Dad. He didn't defend me. He defended her. That's when I realized Brian had already chosen a side. Then I stood up. Excuse me. I need to make a call. I walked into the guest bedroom, closed the door. A minute later, Brian knocked. Dad? You okay? I'm fine, Brian. Tiffany feels bad. She had too much wine. Dad, don't make this a thing. It's already a thing. Silence. Then his footsteps walking away. I called Patricia. Patricia, it's Frank. Frank? It's Thanksgiving. Is everything okay? I need you to execute the amendment. Now. Silence. Then, what happened? She said it, out loud. We're waiting for the will to kick in. Your daughter-in-law? Yes. In front of you? At the table. Patricia exhaled. Okay. I'll draft the amendment tonight. You'll need to come in and sign it. Tomorrow. It's Black Friday. I don't care. I want this done. Understood. I'll email you the draft in 2 hours. We'll meet tomorrow morning. Thank you. I hung up, sat on the edge of the bed, Helen's voice in my head. Don't be rash, Frank. Think about Brian. I was thinking about Brian. I was thinking about how he sat there and let his wife talk about me like I was already dead, like I was a problem to be solved. I went back to the table. Tiffany was laughing about something when I sat down. She didn't notice I'd been gone for 10 minutes. Frank, there you are. I was just telling Brian about the cruise we're planning for next summer. 2 weeks in the Mediterranean. It's going to be amazing. Sounds nice. You should come, she said, but her tone made it clear she didn't mean it. I'll think about it. We finished dessert. Pumpkin pie, store-bought. Helen would have made it from scratch. At 6 p.m., I stood up. Thank you for dinner. It was lovely. You're leaving already? Tiffany looked surprised. We were going to play cards. I'm tired. Long day. Brian walked me to the door. Dad, are you okay? You seem quiet. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man who'd just sat there while his wife calculated my death like a retirement plan. I'm fine, Brian. Just thinking. About what? The future. He didn't ask what I meant. I drove home. Patricia's email was waiting when I got there. The amendment was simple, brutal. Effective immediately, Brian and Tiffany were out. Helen's name went on the donations instead, not because I hated them, because I couldn't reward what they'd become. I read it 3 times. Then I signed it. Patricia notarized it the next morning. This is final, Frank. Once this is filed, they get nothing. I know. Are you sure? I thought about Tiffany's laugh, about Brian's silence. I'm sure. We filed it that afternoon. By the time the weekend was over, it was done. I didn't tell them. 3 months passed. Brian called every 2 weeks. Tiffany texted occasionally, always surface level. Weather, holidays, how was I doing? Generic, safe, distant, never an apology, never acknowledgement of what she'd said. They didn't know. Christmas came and went. They sent a card, Store-bought, pre-printed message, no personal note. I sent them nothing. In February, I ended up in the ER at 3 a.m. Nothing serious, but the hospital called Brian anyway. He showed up, stayed 20 minutes, and left for work. Tiffany didn't come at all. She sent flowers with a card that ended with a single letter, T. I kept the card. It belonged with the truth. In March, Brian called. "Hey Dad, just checking in. How are you?" "Fine, back to normal." "Good. Listen, Tiffany and I are planning a trip to Napa in April. Wine tasting." "Sounds nice." "Yeah." Pause. "Hey Dad, did you ever think about putting my name on the accounts? Just for safety, in case something happens again." "Safety. Right. I'll think about it," I said. "Okay. Love you, Dad." "Love you." The words came out automatically, rehearsed, hollow. I didn't say them back. In April, I updated my will one more time, added a letter to be read after I died. Patricia typed while I dictated. The letter explained everything: the brunch conversation, the power of attorney request, the Thanksgiving dinner, the turkey, the wine, the moment Tiffany laughed, the phone call to Patricia, the amendment, everything, the house, the accounts, everything Helen and I built was sitting right there in black and white. "Tiffany," said the line. Brian stayed quiet, and quiet is a choice. The final line: "You didn't lose your inheritance when I died. You lost it the moment you started waiting for me too. You lost it at Thanksgiving dinner, over a glass of wine, when you laughed about collecting what I'd worked 40 years to build. That laugh cost you just over $1 million. I hope it was worth it." I signed it. Patricia notarized it. We filed it with the will. When the time comes, they'll read it. And when Brian realizes it wasn't Tiffany who lost everything, it was him. He'll finally understand what silence costs. What would you do? I'm still alive, still in my house, still playing tennis twice a week. Brian and Tiffany don't know what's coming. Maybe they think about the inheritance sometimes. Maybe they've already planned what they'll do with the money. They'll find out eventually. And when they do, I hope they remember Thanksgiving dinner. I hope they remember that I smiled, that I poured the wine. That I said nothing, because I didn't need to say anything. I let them say it for me. Here's the thing about waiting for someone to die. It's a gamble. You're betting they won't notice. You're betting they'll stay quiet. But what if they don't? What if they smile, pour the wine, and call their lawyer? The Alzheimer's Research Charity will fund a research wing in Helen's name. The Children's Hospital will help expand its ICU. My money will. Their greed won't. Tiffany's money, or what she thought would be hers, never existed, because the moment she laughed about waiting, she forfeited it. They didn't lose the inheritance. They threw it away the day they stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a payout. They weren't waiting for an inheritance. They were waiting for my funeral. If you enjoy stories full of surprises and quiet revenge, you can check out my playlist. Sometimes the quietest revenge is just letting people face the consequences of their own words.